Your grandmother is not who you think she is. My daughter-in-law's voice cut through the Sunday dinner table like a blade. I set my fork down slowly, carefully. The crystal clinked against the plate, and my son Marcus looked up from his pasta, confusion flickering across his face. Evelyn, his wife of 8 years, sat perfectly straight in her chair, her hands folded in her lap. She was smiling that smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes. My grandchildren, Sophia and Thomas, both 12, stared at their mother with the blank expression of children who had heard this speech before. Many times before. "What are you talking about?" Marcus asked, but his voice already carried the weight of exhaustion. He knew. He always knew what was coming. Evelyn turned to the children, ignoring him completely. "Your grandmother died 2 years ago. The woman sitting across from you is not her. It's something that took her body, something that wears her face." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I had learned that any response, any defense, any attempt to explain would only fuel her narrative. But inside my chest, something was fracturing. Again. The children looked at me. Sophia's eyes were uncertain, searching my face for something she couldn't quite name. Thomas picked at his napkin, already withdrawing into himself the way he always did when his mother said these things. I watched their confusion bloom into something darker. Doubt, fear, shame about doubting their grandmother. This was how it worked now. This was how my life had become a haunting in my own body. Marcus set down his fork with more force than necessary. "Evelyn, we talked about this. We agreed?" "I agreed to nothing," she said, her voice still pleasant, still controlled. "I agreed to let you maintain this delusion, but the children deserve to know the truth. They deserve to be protected from what's happening in this house." I looked at my son, really looked at him. The lines under his eyes had deepened. His shoulders curved inward like he was trying to make himself smaller, less noticeable, less of a target. He had stopped fighting her about 3 months ago. I remembered the exact moment. It was after she told him I had poisoned his coffee. She hadn't said it to his face. She had texted it to him while he was at work, with a photo of his cup beside a bottle of cleaning supplies I kept under the sink. He had come home that day and watched me drink from the same coffee pot without saying a word. The test had failed. I was still alive, but something in him had broken anyway. "I'm not going to do this," Marcus said quietly. "Not again. Not in front of the kids." Evelyn's smile widened. "Exactly. You never want to discuss it. You want to keep pretending. That's what it does. It makes you complicit. It makes you part of the haunting." Sophia pushed back from the table. "I'm not hungry anymore." Thomas followed his sister without a word. I watched them climb the stairs, their young faces already learning the shape of family secrets. Already learning that sometimes the scariest thing isn't what's said out loud. It's what's left unspoken. It's the way adults stop looking at each other. It's the silence that fills the spaces where love used to be. Marcus stood up too. "I'm going to check on them." "Of course you are," Evelyn said. "You always choose them over the truth. That's what makes this so tragic. You're protecting a demon." He left without responding. The dining room was suddenly very quiet. Just me and Evelyn and the cooling pasta on the table. She began clearing dishes with deliberate movements, each clink of the plate against the counter, a small punctuation mark. A small cruelty. I sat alone at the table and understood, with the clarity that only comes from deep pain, that I was losing my grandchildren. Not to death, not to distance, but to a story A story that had been told so many times, in so many ways, that it had begun to feel like truth. And the worst part was that I couldn't fight it. Every attempt to defend myself, every word I spoke in my own defense, only proved her point, only showed that the demon in my skin was clever enough to lie. This had started 2 years ago, right after my husband, Thomas, Sophia and Thomas's grandfather, had died. The heart attack came on a Tuesday morning in March. He was in the garden, planting tomatoes, and then he simply fell. The ambulance arrived in 12 minutes. He was gone in 14. I remember the paramedics trying. I remember the way they looked at each other when they realized it was too late. I remember the silence that followed, which was somehow louder than any sound I had ever heard. Marcus and Evelyn came to the hospital. They sat with me in that gray waiting room, and Evelyn held my hand. She was kind. She was gentle. She brought me water and sat beside me while I made phone calls to relatives and friends. She told me that she loved Thomas, that he had been like a father to her, that I wasn't alone. I believed her. The funeral was packed. Thomas had been a beloved man, a retired teacher, a volunteer, a person who had spent 68 years being genuinely kind to people. The church overflowed. People stood in the aisles and outside on the steps. They told stories about his impact, about the way he had changed their lives, about the goodness he had carried with him. Evelyn sat in the front pew, her hand on my shoulder. She cried. Real tears, or tears that looked real. I was too numb to tell the difference. After the funeral, after the reception, after everyone had gone home, Evelyn suggested that I move in with them. Just for a while, she said, just until I could get back on my feet, just so I wouldn't be alone in that big house where every room held a memory of Thomas. Marcus agreed. He thought it was a good idea. He thought I needed family around me. I moved in on a Thursday in April. The first month was fine, better than fine. Evelyn made my favorite meals. She helped me sort through Thomas's things. She sat with me during the nights when grief woke me at 3 a.m, gasping like I was drowning. She seemed to genuinely care about my well-being. She seemed to want me to heal. It was during the second month that things began to shift. It started small. A comment here and there. Nothing that seemed intentional. Nothing that Marcus could point to and say, that was cruel. But things like, you seem confused today, Will. Are you sure that happened? Or, that's not how I remember it. Are you feeling okay? Or, the one that stuck with me the most. Thomas used to say you had trouble with your memory. Is that getting worse? Marcus didn't notice. Or maybe he noticed and didn't want to. Maybe it was easier to let these small comments slide past than to confront what they meant. By the 3rd month, the comments had become more pointed. Evelyn would correct me in front of the children. Grandmother's confused again, she would say to Sophia and Thomas. She thinks she planted those roses, but I did. Last spring, Grandmother was in Arizona. Except I hadn't been in Arizona. I had been right here, in this garden, with my hands in the soil and dirt under my fingernails, but the children looked at me with uncertainty. And I began to wonder if maybe I was confused. If maybe grief was doing something to my mind. That's when the gaslighting became weaponized. It happened gradually. A forgotten appointment that Evelyn said I had made but never told me about. A phone call from a friend that Evelyn said she had relayed to me but hadn't. A prescription that I thought I had filled, but Evelyn claimed I had never picked up. Each incident by itself was small. Each one could be explained. But together, they created a picture of a woman whose grip on reality was slipping. Maybe you should see a doctor, Evelyn suggested one morning, her voice dripping with concern. Just to rule out early dementia, especially after losing Thomas. Grief can do strange things to the mind. I made an appointment with my physician. Dr. Nilsson was thorough. He ran tests. He asked me questions. He checked my cognitive function. Everything came back normal. Better than normal, actually. My memory was sharp. My thinking was clear. My blood pressure and cholesterol were excellent. "You're in remarkable health for a woman your age," Dr. Nilsson said. "Whatever concerns you have, they're not medical." I told him about Evelyn's suggestions, about the pattern of small things that made me question my own mind. He listened carefully, and then he said something that was the crack that split the facade. That's a form of psychological abuse called gaslighting. It's designed to make you question your own reality. I want you to be very careful. I left his office with a name for what was happening. But having a name for something doesn't make it easier to stop. When I told Evelyn what the doctor had said, she laughed. She actually laughed. "He said that? Based on what? A few misunderstandings?" "Will, that's exactly what someone experiencing cognitive decline would think. They would interpret normal corrections as abuse. They would blame other people for their own confusion. It's a classic symptom." And just like that, my own defense became evidence against me. By the 5th month, Evelyn had begun telling people, carefully, always with concern in her voice, that she was worried about my mental state. She told my sister that I had become forgetful. She told my friends that I sometimes didn't recognize them. She told Marcus's colleagues that she was concerned about leaving the children alone with me because I might forget to pick them up from school. None of it was true. But truth had become irrelevant. Marcus started watching me differently. Not with love, with surveillance. He began checking in on me during the day, asking me what I had eaten for lunch, asking me if I remembered the conversation we had that morning, asking me if I knew what day it was. Each question was wrapped in concern, but underneath was doubt. And doubt, once planted, grows like a weed. The children noticed. They started treating me differently, too. They stopped climbing into my lap. They stopped asking me to tell them stories. They would look at their mother when I spoke, as if checking to see if what I was saying was real. If I was real. 6 months after Thomas died, Evelyn told me that she had been researching something. She had found information about a condition called possession. Not the supernatural kind, she said, but a psychological kind. A kind where a person's personality changes so dramatically after a trauma that it's almost like they've become someone else. "I think that might be what's happening with grandmother," she told Sophia and Thomas one evening, knowing I could hear from the kitchen. "I think when grandfather died, something broke inside her, and now she's not really grandmother anymore. She's something else wearing grandmother's face." Sophia asked, "Is she dangerous?" "I don't know," Evelyn said. "We have to be very careful." That night, I locked myself in the guest bedroom and cried in a way I hadn't cried since Thomas died. Not from grief this time, from the realization that I was being systematically erased from my own life, that my own son was beginning to believe that I was something other than human, that my grandchildren were learning to fear me. I should have left then. I should have packed a bag and walked out and never looked back. But I was 63 years old, and I had just lost my husband, and my entire sense of self had been constructed around being a good mother, a good wife, a good grandmother. Without those things, I didn't know who I was. And Evelyn knew that. She had been counting on it. Over the next several months, she escalated. She began moving things and then telling me I had moved them. She would hide my glasses and then suggest that I was becoming more forgetful. She would change the locks on my bedroom door and say it was for my safety. She would limit my access to money. I had given Marcus power of attorney after Thomas died, thinking it was just for practical purposes, and then suggest that I was spending money on things I couldn't remember. The isolation deepened. My friends stopped calling as often because Evelyn would tell them I was resting or confused. My sister stopped visiting as much because Marcus said it was upsetting me. My doctor's concerns were dismissed as him not understanding the full picture. I was being systematically cut off from anyone who could verify that I was still myself. And the worst part was that it was working. I was beginning to doubt myself. I was beginning to wonder if maybe Evelyn was right. Maybe I was becoming someone else. Maybe grief had broken something in me that couldn't be fixed. Maybe I was dangerous to the children. Maybe I was a ghost haunting this house, wearing the face of their grandmother, but being something fundamentally other. That's when I made a decision. A small decision, but one that would change everything. I started documenting everything. I bought a notebook with my own money I had hidden in the freezer in a container labeled ice cream, and I began writing down every incident, every gaslighting moment, every lie, every manipulation, every time Evelyn told the children something false about me, every time she corrected me in front of them, every time she suggested that I was losing my mind. I kept the notebook hidden in my pillowcase. Every night, I would write. And every night as I wrote, I felt myself coming back. I felt myself becoming real again. Because documentation is a form of resistance, evidence is a form of truth. I also started recording conversations. I downloaded an app on my phone, a burner phone I had bought at a pharmacy with cash, and I began capturing Evelyn's words, her voice, her lies, her deliberate attempts to make me seem unstable. It took 3 months of documentation before I had enough material to take action. 3 months of pretending to be confused while I was actually observing. 3 months of acting the part of the haunted grandmother while I was secretly gathering evidence. Then I called a lawyer. I didn't tell Marcus. I didn't tell Evelyn. I met with Juliet Keller, a family law attorney who specialized in elder abuse and psychological manipulation. I brought my notebook. I brought my recordings. I brought the medical reports showing that my cognitive function was normal. I brought the emails from my sister describing how Evelyn had discouraged her from visiting. I brought everything. Juliet listened to the recordings with his head down. When they finished, he looked up at me with an expression I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Belief, validation, recognition of my reality. "This is textbook psychological abuse," he said, "combined with financial control and isolation from your support system. This is serious, Mrs. Cole, and I think we have a strong case." "A case for what?" I asked. "For removing you from that situation. For establishing a protective order if necessary. For documenting her behavior in a way that will hold up in court if it comes to that. But first, we need to talk about what you want to happen." What I wanted was to go back in time. To have Thomas still alive. To have never moved in with Marcus and Evelyn. To have stayed in my own house where I knew who I was. But that wasn't possible. So instead, I told Juliet what I actually wanted. I want my grandchildren to know the truth. I want them to know that I'm not a demon. I want them to understand what their mother is doing. And I want to get out of that house. Juliet nodded. "Then here's what we're going to do." The plan was careful and strategic. We would wait for a moment when Evelyn's behavior was particularly egregious. A moment that could be witnessed and documented. A moment that would make it impossible for Marcus to deny what was happening. And then we would act. That moment came on a Friday night in November, almost a year after Thomas had died. Evelyn had invited my sister, Karen, to dinner. Karen had been discouraged from visiting for months, but Evelyn had suddenly encouraged it. I realized later that she was confident enough in her narrative that she thought she could maintain it even in front of my sister. She thought she could gaslight me so thoroughly that even my own family would see me as unstable. We were eating dinner, a meal that Evelyn had made, a meal she had been subtly suggesting I had ruined by being confused about the ingredients. When she began her performance, she was gentle at first, concerned. She asked me if I remembered making the salad. I said I hadn't. She said that I had asked her for the recipe that morning. I said I hadn't. She turned to Karen with a sad smile. She does this all the time now, Evelyn said. She forgets things, then she denies them. Then she becomes upset when we try to help her remember. It's heartbreaking, really. Marcus is so worried about the children being exposed to this kind of behavior. Karen was watching me carefully. I could see her trying to reconcile the sister she knew with the woman Evelyn was describing. That's when Evelyn went too far. She turned to Sophia and Thomas, who were eating quietly, and she said, "Your grandmother isn't really your grandmother anymore. Something happened to her when your grandfather died. And now she's something else. Something that looks like her, but isn't. Do you understand?" Thomas set down his fork. "Mom, that's not true." "It is true," Evelyn said, "and I need you to be very careful around her, because we don't know what she might do." I stood up. I had planned to remain calm, to let the situation unfold, to let Karen see what was happening naturally. But I couldn't. I couldn't sit there and listen to my daughter-in-law tell my grandchildren that I was a demon. "That's enough," I said. My voice was steady, clear, sane. "Karen, I want you to hear this directly from me. I am not confused. I am not losing my mind. I am not possessed by any kind of spirit. I am your sister. I am these children's grandmother, and I am being systematically abused by the woman sitting across from me." Evelyn's face went very still. She had not expected me to fight back. She had expected me to be too broken, too doubting of my own reality, to mount any kind of defense. "Will-I-el," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "This is exactly what I was talking about. The accusations, the anger. This is the possession manifesting." "No," I said. "This is a woman who has had enough." I pulled out my phone, the burner phone, and I played one of the recordings. Evelyn's voice filled the dining room. Her voice, unmistakably, saying to a friend on the phone, "I've got her so confused now that she doesn't even know what's real anymore. It's actually kind of impressive how easy it was. All I had to do was contradict her enough times, and she started doing the work for me." The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus stood up. "What is that?" "Evidence," I said, "of what your wife has been doing to me for almost a year, with your help, whether you intended it or not." Karen's face had gone pale. She was looking at Evelyn with an expression I had never seen before. Disgust, betrayal, recognition of something dark. Evelyn stood up too. "This is manipulation. She's trying to turn everyone against me. This is what abusers do. They gaslight the people trying to help them, and then they claim the helpers are the abusers. It's a classic reversal." But her voice had changed. It had lost that smooth, controlled quality. It had become sharp, defensive, real, in a way it had never been before. "I have more recordings," I said. "I have documentation. I have a medical evaluation from my doctor stating that my cognitive function is normal. I have emails from my sister describing how you discouraged her from visiting. I have all of it. and I'm going to show it to a lawyer. And if necessary, I'm going to show it to a court. Marcus looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time in months, I saw recognition in his eyes. Recognition that I was still here. That I had never left. That I had been fighting this entire time. I didn't know, he said quietly. I didn't understand what was happening. I know you didn't, I said. But now you do. Evelyn walked out of the dining room. We heard her go upstairs. We heard her bedroom door slam. The rest of the evening was strange and fragmented. Karen held my hand. Marcus sat in stunned silence. Sophia and Thomas looked confused, as if the world they had been learning to navigate had suddenly shifted on its axis. Which it had. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the guest bedroom with my notebook and my recordings and my evidence, and I waited for morning. When it came, I called Juliet Keller. I told him what had happened. He said to pack a bag and leave immediately. He said he would handle the rest. By noon, I was in a hotel. By the next day, I had filed a restraining order. By the end of the week, Marcus had moved out of the house with the children. By the end of the month, he had filed for divorce. The legal process was brutal. Evelyn fought hard. She hired her own lawyer. She continued to maintain that I was unstable, that I was vindictive, that I had fabricated the recordings. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings were clear. The documentation was thorough. And most importantly, Marcus had finally seen the truth. During the custody evaluation, the children's therapist spoke with Sophia and Thomas separately. She asked them about their grandmother. She asked them what their mother had told them about me. She asked them if they had ever been afraid of me. Sophia broke down. She said that her mother had been telling them I was dangerous. That she had been telling them I wasn't really their grandmother. That she had been making them doubt me. That she had been making them afraid of someone they loved. Thomas said something simpler, but more devastating. I knew it wasn't true, he said. But Mom kept saying it, and I started to believe her anyway. The therapist recommended that the children have limited contact with Evelyn. That they receive therapy to process the psychological manipulation they had experienced. That their primary residence be with their father. The judge agreed. In her ruling, she stated that Evelyn had engaged in systematic psychological abuse designed to isolate an elderly woman from her family and support system, and to manipulate children into fearing and rejecting their grandmother. She stated that this behavior constituted emotional abuse and elder abuse. She awarded Marcus full custody of the children, with Evelyn having supervised visitation only. I sat in the courtroom and listened to the judge describe what had happened to me. And for the first time in over a year, I felt like myself again. Not because the judge said so, not because I had won, but because I had been believed, because my reality had been validated, because I was no longer a ghost in my own life. Now I understand something that I didn't understand before. I understand how easy it is to make someone doubt themselves. I understand how a person can become haunted by someone else's narrative. I understand how quickly family can turn into a weapon. But I also understand that documentation matters, that evidence matters, that speaking up matters, that there is always a way out, even when it feels like there isn't. The children are back in their lives with me. Sophia is 14 now. Thomas is 13. They still have questions about what their mother did. They still have moments where they doubt themselves, where they wonder if maybe they were wrong about me, if maybe I really was something other than their grandmother. But we're working through it. We're seeing a family therapist. We're rebuilding trust. Marcus and I have a complicated relationship now. He carries guilt for not seeing what was happening sooner. He carries shame for the times he doubted me. But he also carries relief that he finally understood, that he finally chose to believe me, that he finally chose his children's well-being over his marriage. I moved back into my house, the house where Thomas and I built our life together, the house that Evelyn tried to take from me by making me question my own sanity. I walk through these rooms now, and I know who I am. I know that I'm not a demon. I know that I'm not a ghost. I know that I'm a woman who survived something terrible and lived to tell about it. Evelyn is still out there, still maintaining that she did nothing wrong, still convinced that she was the victim in this situation. I don't know if she'll ever understand what she did. I don't know if she'll ever take responsibility for the psychological damage she inflicted. But I also don't need her to. I don't need her validation or her apology or her acknowledgement of the truth. I have my own reality now. I have my own truth, and that's enough. If you're experiencing something like this, if someone is systematically making you doubt your own mind, if you're being isolated from your support system, if you're being told that you're something other than human, please reach out. Please talk to someone. Please document what's happening. Please understand that your reality matters. Your truth matters. You matter. And there is always a way out, even when it feels like there isn't.